Today we are looking at a modern remake of a Musical Fidelity amplifier, an integrated amplifier from the 1980s. It's called the A1 and it offers a mere 25 watts per channel. But as we shall see, this integrated amplifier isn't only for high efficiency speakers, and as usual, we'll be assessing the A1's performance with music you'd read about on the NME, on Uncut, and on Stereogum.
This episode is brought to you by AudioQuest. With products to fill every need and prices to suit every budget, AudioQuest is made for you. Visit audioquest.com for more information.
Now before we start, how about some laid-back indie rock from Dean Wareham? This is Wareham and his band recorded live at the St Pancras Old Church in London in 2013. It says so on the cover, right? And this live set, draws on Wareham's solo career, plus songs from Luna and Galaxy 500, who split way back in '91, but whose legacy, I think, remains very strong. Now, the highlight for me here is the closing track, which is a very sort of glacial cover of New Order's Ceremony. It's bloody fantastic. And I've been playing Wareham's Ceremony quite a few times these last few weeks through the Musical Fidelity A1. And if it's low profile and function over form aesthetics have you thinking of Live Aid or Ronald Reagan, you're not going shoulder pad. Shoulder pad is Cockney rhyming slang for mad, because this amplifier's industrial design is almost 40 years old. The late Tim de Paravicini designed the A1, the original A1, under the stewardship of Musical Fidelity's founder, Anthony Michelson. It was introduced in 1985, but I think discontinued 10 years later. But back then it sold for £189 and I think offered significant bang for buck to those with the right kind of speakers. However, the buying public didn't take to the more powerful do-over released in 2008, I think, and that had an internal DAC and a front panel display, and none of those features can be found in the new model. And yeah, I think this new model, this 2023 version, will right that 2008 wrong, even though it sells for €1599 or 1,700 US dollars. So Musical Fidelity is now under Austrian ownership because Project's CEO Heinz Lichtenegger bought the British company back in 2018, and the new A1 is not a carbon copy of the original. So Lichtenegger's design team has made some fairly significant changes. So first of all, the most obvious one is that the chassis is slightly wider than the original. The amplifier here is a fully discrete circuit with dual mono power supplies, and many internal components have been upgraded for better long-term heat resistance, because I believe that was a problem with the original. Another change they've made is with the volume pot. It's now a motorized Alps RK volume pot, and that means we get something that we didn't get in the 80s, and that is a remote control. I've got it here somewhere. This remote's physical density and its 3-button simplicity, I think, is an example for other manufacturers to follow. It's stupid and it's simple, and it feels quite nice in the hand. The tape monitor toggle switch on the front of the original has been changed on the new version to one that activates a direct bypass of the pre-amplifier circuit's 10 dB of extra gain, or gain. I don't know whether it's extra or not. I guess if you bypass it, then it's extra, but if you want to keep it in all the time, then it's just normal, right? And also, the output power on the new model has been upped from 20 watts per channel to 25 watts per channel, but Hi-Fi News' Paul Miller has measured it as capable of up to 34 watts per channel. And I think the Austrian design team here should be applauded for staying true to the 1985 original and not adding mod cons like a DAC or a network streamer. Because in the age of WIM, FiiO, Eversolo and Bluesound, adding a streaming DAC that can be optionally tucked away out of sight has never been easier or more affordable. And I used a FiiO R9 for Apple Music and for Tidal and for Roon Ready streaming. Now the R9 is connected to the A1 with an analog interconnect and receives streams from the nucleus, the Roon nucleus, in the corner of my room over my left shoulder. And the Roon Remote app shows me the Dean Wareham solo albums stored as FLAC on that Roon nucleus server. And it also shows me cover versions of Wareham songs done by other artists. And Roon also shows me the other bands of which Wareham has been a member, and then it shows me those bands' albums. In other words, Roon allows me to navigate Dean Wareham's musical universe as an interconnected web of musicians or artists. And I would like to thank Roon for sponsoring this video. Now, I prefer the sound of the A1's normal operational mode because it keeps the extra preamplifier gain in the signal path for more obvious dynamic shove and rhythmic drive. But it caps the volume wheel turn for me at around 10 o'clock when hitting 90 dB SPL in the seat. I used a dB meter to measure that. And that's how I hear it with a pair of KEF Q Concerto Meta that you see behind me working in this 6 meter by 5 meter room. So this immediately puts the boot in on the idea that we need almost a full volume turn to wake up 85 dB stand mounts. Now, I can see also how other listeners might prefer the direct mode's more laid back disposition. And when I engage direct mode, the 10 dB drop in gain allows me to turn the volume wheel to 11 o'clock. Now for vinyl playback, I went with a Rager Planar 8 turntable fitted with an Autophon 2M black cartridge. That's an cartridge that extends volume turn possibilities, round to roughly about midnight. And the internal current mode phono stage will also talk to moving coil cartridges, but only where 60 dB of gain is enough. Now on knob feel, the volume wheel here on the A1 is reassuringly stiff, and the source selector requires, I think, higher than average turning force to sort of click clunk between its 6 all analog inputs. But let's get it out of the way first. The A1 isn't as refined in the upper treble as the outgoing T+A all-in-one that we reviewed recently, nor does it offer as much musical insight, and that's pretty much as we'd expect from such a yawning price differential. But the A1's musical presence is keener and more driven than the T+A, and in fact I think this amp is like no other amp I've heard at this price point, or pretty much any price point actually. But obviously that's restricted to amps that I've heard, and I cannot include amps that I've not heard in that subset. Now what I mean by that is that we get tone color that's inked in oil, and you really get to hear that from playing Grace Jones's Night Clubbing. And then from Kraftwerk's Radioactivity, the English version, we hear mid-range dynamics that I gotta say, they sort of shine or radiate like a Christmas tree. And I find that the A1 lends abundant presence and liveliness to the Velvet Underground's I'm Waiting for the Man. And it also adds extra vibrant sort of rhythmic propulsion to the vinyl version of Monolake's new album called Studio. Now, I often hear the Autophon 2M Black has a bit of a boring sounding cartridge, but not here. It's super lively and, what's the word here? Avid? It's super lively and outgoing. I don't know. Don't listen to me. As I have said many times on this channel, I can only make side-by-side comparisons to the gear that I have here at the time of review. So if I'm not comparing it to an amp that you want me to compare it to, I'm really sorry. So first to be pulled down from the storage shelf was the Marantz Stereo 70S, which is kind of my favorite €1,000-ish, I say ish because you can get it for less, integrated amplifier right now. Now the Marantz gives us 75 watts per channel of Class AB speaker power, but with the bonuses of an internal network streamer and a DAC, and also an HDMI output that puts the now playing information on the TV. But note that the Stereo 70S's phono stage is MM only. Now the Marantz is more refined sounding than the Musical Fidelity, and it sounds slightly more transparent with Carl Craig's frankly epic and monstrous remix of Borderlands Transport. If you're an electronic music fan, you have to hear this track. But it kind of does all of this, the Marantz does all of this from a sort of more laid back disposition. And the A1 sounds comparatively zippier and more vivid. Yeah, I think that was the word I was looking for before, wasn't it? Vivid. The Musical Fidelity amp invites us to effectively reach out and touch the sounds in front of us, whereas the Marantz says, look, but don't touch. And yet the Marantz isn't as comparatively standoffish as the NAD C3050. That's the vintage style sort of Class D amp that they released, what, 2 years ago now? But the pricing on the NAD is much closer to that of the A1 than the Marantz. And let's not forget that the NAD gives us a network streamer, a DAC, and Dirac live room compensation. But once again, moving coil cart runners need not apply here. Now the NAD is internally a fully modern amp that offers 100 watts per channel of Class D power. And yet, the 25 watt per channel A1 sounds like it has more drive and more poise when listening to Lou Reed's Vicious. And it sort of puts Leonard Cohen's 1,000 Kisses Deep in your lap. Metaphorically, of course, whilst the NAD holds the song at arm's length, even more so than the Marantz. And the A1 presents Bleachers' Chinatown, which features a guest turn from Bruce Springsteen, with more obvious tone colour and, yeah, more dynamic muscularity. That's compared to the NAD. Mind you, if you want the last word in bass driver control or the very widest soundstage, you want that NAD. But that doesn't mean that the A1's driver control is loose. We should not mistake its 25 watts per channel for weakness, because in my experience it drives the KEF and the Vivid Kaya S12 just fine and with an arresting musical presence. So even when using such a low powered amplifier, at least on paper, with lower efficiency stand mounts, bass control for me still exceeded my expectations. So where is the catch? Well, that lies in the A1's topology, because this is a power hungry Class A amplifier whose output devices are almost, I gotta underline almost, but almost always on. So a good deal of power going into the A1 is lost to heat, and that heat is dissipated by the ridged top plate. So pointing a Bosch heat gun at that top plate, I measured 62 degrees Celsius when the A1 was playing music and 67 degrees Celsius when idle. And that's because always on energy turns to heat when the amplifier isn't driving the loudspeakers. So the Musical Fidelity effectively runs hot enough to cook an egg, albeit slowly. And I know this because I've done it. I made a video about that experiment for my patrons, and I'll put a link to that below. Now, regular viewers will know that the A1 has been in my review queue for many months. And that's because I've been waiting for the cooler weather to arrive so that I can use it all day long without reaching for the air conditioning unit up there. And the A1 needs plenty of breathing room, and as per the warning inside the box, it's the first thing you see, you shouldn't put anything on top of it, and you should really keep it out of reach of children because they'll burn themselves. Now that for me means that the A1 isn't an amplifier for anyone watching their electricity bill or anyone who is concerned about climate change. Now I normally let my amplifiers run here 24/7, especially if they are Class D. but definitely not this one. I turn it off at night or when I leave the house during the day. Of course, for many people, the A1's energy consumption and heat will not be an issue, right? Because not everybody thinks the same way I do about heat coming off a hi-fi product. But the way I see it, the Musical Fidelity is to amplifiers what Klipsch and Zoo and maybe JBL are to loudspeakers. So it creates a listening experience that prioritizes dynamic drive over the last ounces of clarity and refinement. So this is more than a nostalgia exercise. I think the Musical Fidelity A1, it really delivers. Anyway, if you like this video, please like and subscribe below and hit us up on Patreon if you want to hear me talk about how I use the A1's top plate to cook an egg. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. And I think the Austrian design team should be applauded for staying true to the 1985's And I think the Austrian design team here should be applauded for staying true to the 1998. God. And it also shows me the cover versions of his songs done by other artists. And Roon, the 10 dB drop in gain, and the 10 dB drop in gain from that.